Missionary of Mercy. Cubans uplifted by the third pope to visit their tiny island nation. Making history. The first ever papal address to Congress and the first Canonization Mass on American soil. From the UN to Ground Zero. After addressing world leaders, the Pope prays for 9/11 victims and their families. And family finale. The World Meeting of Families, climaxed by the Pope's huge open-air Mass in Philadelphia. Those stories and more on this special edition of EWTN News Nightly, reliving the Pope in America on the Feast of the Guardian Angels, Friday, October 2nd, 2015. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with a special look back at the Pope in America from EWTN News Nightly. Pope Francis gets back to his routine in Rome after a 10-day whirlwind trip to Cuba and then the United States. Tonight, we revisit highlights from the historic apostolic journey. The 78-year-old Pope first visited Cuba. He then traveled on to Washington, D.C., New York, and then finally Philadelphia for the World Meeting of Families. This was the Holy Father's first time visiting the United States of America. While in Cuba, Francis celebrated Mass with thousands in Havana's Revolution Plaza. Our Susie Pinto was there and filed this report.
Pope Francis had a big weekend here in Havana. He said he came to this island nation as a missionary of mercy, and in true Francis style, he is reaching out to believers and non-believers alike. He met with Fidel Castro, Cuba's former leader. The meeting took place in Castro's home with his children and grandchildren. Pope Francis gave Fidel a book by a Catholic priest who was expelled from Cuba after the revolution. Before that historic meeting, Pope Francis followed in the footsteps of his predecessors John Paul II and Benedict XVI with a huge outdoor mass. Thousands of Cubans welcomed Pope Francis to Revolution Square in Havana. A massive banner of the Divine Mercy was put up for the Mass, a stark contrast to an image of Che Guevara, one of the founders of Cuba's communist and atheist revolution.
Todos estamos invitados, estimulados por Jesús.
Pope Francis asked Cubans to serve one another, saying, "We don't serve ideas or ideology, we serve people."
Gracias, Santo Padre, por haber favorecido el proceso de renovación en las relaciones entre Cuba y Estados Unidos, que tanto beneficiará a nuestro pueblo.
Havana's Cardinal Jaime Ortega thanking the Holy Father for helping to normalize U.S.-Cuba relations, which he says will benefit Cubans. After Mass, Cuban President Raul Castro was the first to greet Pope Francis, followed by Argentina President Cristina Fernandez. Pope Francis just finished celebrating Mass in Revolution Square. It's a moment of great joy for Cuban Catholics. Now they're waiting to catch one more glimpse of him as he passes by in the Pope Mobile. Hope is the word we hear most when talking with people in the crowd. Hope for an end to the embargo, which this man calls cruel and unjust. Hope to keep serving Christ, which Cuba needs, according to this woman. And hope to spread the gospel without fear. Brian, the highlight of this trip has been talking to the Cuban people directly. They have been friendly, they have been open, and the message they're taking away from Pope Francis is a message of hope. Hope for the church and hope for the future of this nation.
Susie Pinto reporting from Havana. And we talked with a Cuban-American physician and mother about the message of Francis for families in Cuba and in the U.S. America.
You know, the encouragement is huge here because the enthusiasm is amazing in a time when sometimes one despairs that the family is almost over, that whole project is over, because there's so many things that are battering the family. But the enthusiasm here is fabulous, and there's so many people that are so devoted to preserving that institution.
Hispanic Americans must be really lifted up by the message that Pope Francis brings us.
It's so beautiful to hear him speak in our language, and he has these accents and the way he says things that they go directly to our hearts in the most beautiful way. I feel very sorry for people that don't have that language, so they can share that with him. And he does. He speaks directly to us, like our fathers speak to us or our grandfathers, and he knows our needs, and he knows the things that we suffer, and we can feel that in him.
On his way to America, he made a 4-day stop in Cuba. Your parents come from Cuba, and I know you're very close to the people there. Do you think that his visit there will help the Cuban people?
I have every hope that it will. As a Cuban, an exile, it was very difficult to watch the Pope in Cuba because it took all of our faith and all of our hope to watch him be merciful and open to people, the dictators whose hearts have been closed for so many decades. You know, people we've been praying will finally loosen their hold on our brothers and sisters who don't deserve that kind of life that they give them. But I do believe that it's going to be successful, that the final fruit of his trip will be successful. And earlier at the UN, he spoke about something that means something to Cubans, that they should be allowed to be the dignified agents of their own destiny. All people should have that, even Cubans.
So that speech to the UN and all of his talks and homilies, he's really uplifted the family, and especially here at the World Meeting of Families. What do we take from this as we move forward as not only individual families, but as the family of the church?
That the individual family is the foundational part of the church and of all society and of our entire human civilization. And there can't be enough care, whether pastoral or economic or social care of the family. We can't take enough care of it because it's our future and it's everything that's beautiful about us.
Well, our best to your beautiful family, and thank you for joining us on EWTN News Nightly. Dr. Gracie Pozo Christie, thank you.
Thank you.
So Washington, D.C. was next on the Pope's itinerary. His plane was met by the president and the first family. Melissa Rogers, special assistant to the president, tells us why he wanted to personally welcome Francis.
Well, you know, the president has such high regard for Pope Francis, and this is an unusual step for him. But he and the First Lady are just so thrilled to be able to welcome Pope Francis to the United States.
Some of the guests invited to the White House welcoming ceremony are people who really disagree with church teaching. Why were they invited?
We're so pleased that we will have people from across the nation that are associated with the Bishops' Conference and with these fine social service organizations that are linked to the church. We also invited a diverse cross-section of other Americans, both religious leaders and people who aren't affiliated with a faith, but who have high regard for Pope Francis and really enjoy his voice and his leadership and respect him immensely. And they wanted to join, and we wanted them to join, and we know that it will be a very warm welcome.
Melissa, the White House announcing some new initiatives coinciding with common values that the White House shares with the Vatican. What are they?
There's so many, but they include dealing with refugee issues, welcoming refugees and integrating them into our communities, working on extreme poverty around the world, and making sure that people all around the world have the opportunity to really succeed economically and provide for their families, which is something that's so essential to human dignity. We've worked on issues of international religious freedom, and we've worked on issues that relate to climate change and caring for our common home, as the Pope so eloquently put it in his encyclical. So we've been talking about those issues, working on them, and the President's charge to us has been that he wants the visit to have lasting value.
Melissa Rogers, thank you for joining us from the White House tonight.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
Also here in D.C., the first pope from the Americas elevates to sainthood an 18th century Spanish missionary who brought Catholicism to California. Pope Francis declared Junipero Serra a saint outside the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. This marked the first canonization on U.S. soil. Saint Serra was a Franciscan friar from Spain who introduced Christianity to much of California. He established 8 missions there. Francis fast-tracked his canonization, eliminating the requirement for proof of a second miracle. Our Jason Calvi was at the Canonization Mass, where he met a young woman with a special role in the liturgy.
Megan Jones read at today's historic canonization.
Brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord always. As I say it again, rejoice.
I was a little nervous at first, but it came to my mind saying, I think I got this. I know I got it.
But Megan and her parents almost didn't make it because she lost her ID on the train.
There's lots of security out there, and we're concerned that she's going to miss this big opportunity.
They discovered the loss while in line here, where she met some Franciscans.
We prayed to St. Anthony, who finds lost things.
Billy Okumu met the family on the train. He found the ID, trekked all the way here, and tracked down Megan in a crowd of 30,000.
I thought this was a miracle or something.
Poco a poco, de una manera voluntaria.
Father Ken Lavarone was in charge of St. Junipero's case for sainthood. He says keeping the faith in the midst of a crisis is something we can learn from the new saint.
Sarah's motto was siempre adelante, nunca atrás. Always go forward, don't turn back. So that's a good example for all of us, especially when we get discouraged or fed up with things or tired.
In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
What a special story. And Pope Francis made history addressing a joint meeting of Congress, the first pope to do that. Our Wyatt Goolsby was in the House chamber for this historic speech.
Mr. Speaker, the Pope of the Holy See.
Pope Francis entered the House chamber to a standing ovation just before 10 a.m. Speaking in English, the Holy Father's 50-minute speech hit on a variety of topics, from the civil rights movement.
I am happy that America continues to be, for many, a land of dreams.
To the importance of embracing immigrants.
Most of us were once foreigners.
And even abortion.
And defend human life at every stage of its development.
Francis said he's concerned about the family and marriage, which is under threat in his view. Many lawmakers were moved by the Holy Father.
This wasn't a policy speech, it was a speech of a pastor, a speech from the voice of St. Peter, the Vicar of Christ.
So in some ways he does nudge us to be more open about things.
4 Supreme Court justices were present, as well as the Secretary of State, John Kerry. It was clear that Pope Francis struggled with pronouncing certain words in English, but his message was clear to an audience eager to listen.
Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the 4th Pope to address the UN. Francis challenges world leaders. And his visit to Ground Zero helps console all who recall the horror of 9/11. Thank you for joining us this evening for our EWTN News Nightly Special, Pope in America. I'm Brian Patrick. We are looking back at the Holy Father's September apostolic journey to the United States. Arriving in New York City, Pope Francis is the 4th Pope to speak to the United Nations General Assembly. In his native Spanish, he addressed world leaders, discussing climate change, war, and family. The Holy Father asserted the sacredness of life at every stage. Popes Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI also spoke at the UN. We delved into Pope Francis's speech with a renowned expert. Dr. Robert George, professor at Princeton University and founder of the American Principles Project, joining us to talk about the Pope's UN speech. So he talked about the environment itself having a right. What does that mean?
Well, the first thing to notice is that this speech is a wonderful bringing together of all the different dimensions of Catholic social and moral teaching. It tries to integrate all of the teachings, and it does so really in quite a beautiful way. Now, what about this idea of the environment itself having rights? Well, the Pope makes very clear, as he develops that notion, that the environment has rights insofar as and because people are part of the environment.
Indeed.
We are not somehow apart from the environment, we're integrated into the environment. And because the environment serves the needs of human persons, the environment has to be treated as having a kind of personal quality. But it's for the sake of persons that we regard the environment as important and needing to be protected. But he goes on to say something else really, really important, and that is that our concern for the environment and our concern for the poor presupposes that we believe that there truly is a moral law written on the hearts. And then he couldn't be clearer. I have the text here in front of me. He says that moral law includes the natural difference between man and woman, which is what marriage is based on, and absolute respect, I'm quoting him, absolute respect for human life in all stages. The Pope's making very clear that we cannot protect the environment or care for the poor unless we're upholding marriage and the sanctity of human life, including the life of the child in the womb.
So he is seen accurately as an environmentalist of sort, but isn't he setting a whole new direction for environmentalism here?
Oh, he is. It's got to be a humanistic, a personalistic environmentalism, not one that can treat the environment as if it's a deity. The Pope's concern there, of course, is the old error, the old heresy called pantheism, treating the physical world as if it's God. The physical world has significance because human beings are in it. God has put human beings in it, and it serves our interests as human beings. He's also got a powerful message here for environmentalists. You can't concern yourself with the environment and make any sense doing it if you throw overboard marriage and the family, if you throw overboard the unborn child. This is a powerful critique of secularist environmentalism.
There are a couple of points hidden in there that you picked out that need a little interpretation.
Yes, I'll tell you one. The Pope condemns what he calls declarationist nominalism. Now, there's not a lot of that kind of jargon in this speech. It's a very intelligible speech, but I suspect most people won't know what declarationalist nominalism is, but let me explain it to you. It's the idea that you can change the reality of something by calling it something different. For example, this would be the idea that you can make something that's not a marriage into a marriage simply by calling it a marriage. And the Pope not only condemns that, he says that it leads to the undermining of truth and to the undermining of humanity. So he wants us to attend to the reality of things and not try to change realities by renaming them. And then the second concept that jumped out at me that might be a little obscure to people, and I'll quote him again, is the Pope condemns in no uncertain terms what he calls ideological colonization, the imposition, and I'm quoting him, of anomalous models and lifestyles which are alien to a people's identity and in the end irresponsible. Now, what does the Pope mean by that? Here we have the Pope looking the United States in the eye, looking Europe in the eye, the great wealthy democratic nations, and saying, you've got to stop imposing your decadent lifestyles on Africa and Asia and Latin America and the rest of the third world. You cannot make financial aid, developmental aid, conditional upon these nations accepting abortion or gay marriage or any of the other sexualist liberation dogmas. The Pope here again is going right up against this kind of liberal secular orthodoxy and making clear that he is standing with the Church's teaching on life and marriage.
And making history at the United Nations. Dr. Robert George, thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And from the UN, Pope Francis travels south to a place no American can forget. Mark Irons reports from Lower Manhattan.
In today's multi-religious gathering at the September 11th Memorial, Pope Francis gathered with New York religious leaders at Ground Zero for prayer.
We gather today in this hallowed ground, the scene of unspeakable violence and pain.
The Holy Father also met with victims' families. Among the nearly 3,000 killed that day were New York City firefighters trying to save others. Joan Higgins remembers her son, Tim.
He just loved people, and he was very good at his job.
Teresa Mullins says it's easy to be angry at the terrorist who took Michael's life, but
I do forgive because that's what God wants us to do. He forgave us from the cross. Who am I not to forgive?
Pope Francis spoke about the solidarity that was formed from the suffering of 9/11, something survivor Greg Murphy recalls.
Everybody was helping everybody else, the responders, the firemen, the policemen, but the people in the buildings too.
Today's differences were set aside on sacred ground. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, Pope Francis sets a powerful example showing mercy to prisoners. And we make the long journey with the family to Philadelphia's Papal Mass. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick with our special Pope in America flashback from EWTN News Nightly. Pope Francis came to the U.S. first for the World Meeting of Families. This global gathering helped prepare tens of thousands to better hear the Holy Father's message. Suzanne LaFranchi reports.
As of this morning, visitors now have to go through magnetometers, part of the massive security effort.
I think it's appropriate. We've got to keep the Holy Father safe.
Despite the challenges, folks like the James family have a renewed sense of belonging to one global family.
We were able to see that we see the same problems, but we also receive the same spirit, and we all can overcome it together, and we're all communion, one family.
Best-selling author and pastor Rick Warren's parting message to families: live and embrace the gospel daily.
Joy-filled families are based on the love of God.
Bishop Robert Barron believes the conference's message on the family was clear.
The family is what bears to the wider society the deeper purpose of God. So it's a call to mission.
Thank you, Suzanne LaFranchi. And throughout his U.S. trip, Pope Francis visited people on the margins, immigrants, the homeless, even inmates. He became the first pope to visit a prison in the U.S. Again, our Mark Irons was with him at Philadelphia's Curran-Fromhold Correctional Facility.
I'm fortunate to be a part of this.
Gratitude can't be confined, even here.
It's beautiful, man. I feel grateful.
Muy hermosa. Muchas gracias. Pope Francis was thankful for his gift.
It's great to see him happy. He was smiling and
he liked the chair.
Built by prisoners in this maximum security jail, where Francis encouraged 100 inmates to get their lives back on track.
He's so compassionate. It's just awesome.
Dolores Perret was in the front row and was greeted by Francis.
He was just telling me, God bless you and your family. I really don't remember else. I was so excited.
Francis took time to visit all the prisoners, including Joseph Montalvo.
For him to come here to see us, it shows that he cares, that he loves, and it gives people a second chance.
Francis invoked the parable of Jesus washing his apostles' feet. He said everyone, including himself, needs to be cleansed. That message struck a chord with Joseph, who says drugs and bad choices have put him here.
But today gave me a different way. I should be out within a week or two. Within a week or two, I should be home, my family, where I belong at, where I'm going to stay at. But this blessing here is definitely going to keep me home.
Both the Pope and prisoners received a gift. Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Bringing hope. Thank you, Mark. The grand finale of the trip was the World Meeting of Families closing Mass. Hundreds of thousands gather on Philadelphia's Benjamin Franklin Parkway celebrating Eucharist with the Vicar of Christ. People waited for hours to clear airport-style security. They lined the streets, overflowing the wide parkway for this largest and final event of the Pope's U.S. visit. In his homily, the Holy Father emphasized the importance of family and togetherness. And you might remember Brett Halbridge, the St. Louis boy granted a very unusual wish. The 12-year-old with an inoperable brain tumor had a weekend to remember in Philadelphia. The World Meeting of Families heard his story. They surprised Brett and his parents with Mass tickets, and our Catherine Zeltner joined the family's journey.
In St. Louis, Brett Halbridge is better known as the boy who was a priest for a day. The St. Louis Archdiocese and Make-A-Wish Foundation teamed up in April so Brett could process in with priests and seminarians for Holy Thursday Chrism Mass. This week, Brett had a new wish.
I hope to see him bless people with the holy water, like with a little stick. He does the, yeah. I'm not really sure what that's called. But.
When speaking about Pope Francis, Brett sounds older than his age.
So helps the homeless, helps people.
And he gives up his time to help people.
But he's definitely a 12-year-old boy. The walk from the Halbridge's hotel to the Mass is long and sometimes confusing. After making it through a security checkpoint, the Halbridges arrive at the Benjamin Franklin Parkway.
How you guys feel? Good. I'm tired but excited.
Nearly 3 miles and 2 hours later, they settle into their seats. Pope Francis is the star here, with lots of practical advice for families. For the Halbridges, seeing him is a big gift.
Very exciting.
Yes,
it's an honor and a blessing.
Yes, it is. It is like a miracle. It's like great.
Big gift. They won't soon forget. Reporting from Philadelphia, Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Another special family enjoyed a meeting with Pope Francis after a very long road trip. They trekked 13,000 miles from Buenos Aires to Philadelphia in a classic VW van. The Holy Father met with the parents who quit their jobs to make the trip and their 4 children Sunday morning. The Argentines made 12 border crossings, staying with dozens of host families, but they say the papal meeting topped it all.
This is like the cherry in the cake, being with the Pope.
Pope Francis told the family he's been following their trip from its start in the Holy Father's native land. Well, thank you for looking back at the Pope in America with us tonight. We are living history, and our EWTN News Nightly team is blessed to share it with you. I'm Brian Patrick. For the team, good night. God bless you.